Hey there, race cars and caviars. Welcome to a new show on this channel that we are calling Lens of Faith, where we look at current events, topics, and controversies with a Christian-based perspective. What does it mean for believers? Now, unless you have been living under a rock for the last few months, you are familiar with the hashtag metoo movement. In the fall of 2017, this hashtag started to gain virality, but the movement itself has actually been in motion, going strong for the past 10 years under the leadership of a woman named Tarana Burke. The movement found itself in the national spotlight when women and men by the hundreds of thousands started posting their stories of sexual assault on Twitter. And in the months since, we have watched as this movement has exposed many high-powered government officials, as well as Hollywood executives and royalty. Of course, many of you tuned in for the Time's Up Golden Globes. You saw Oprah's speech.
Fighting hard to make sure that they become the leaders who take us to the time when nobody ever has to say, "Me too," again.
And in the last few weeks, this story has made its way straight to the church's doorstep with stories like Andy Savage. For those of you who don't know, a pastor at a large church in Tennessee spoke to his congregation a few weeks ago about a quote-unquote sexual incident that occurred between him and a student when he was serving at a church in Texas 20 years ago. This statement was in response to a blog post written by the victim, Jules Woodson, in which she describes the encounter in great detail. And much of what has caused this story to go so viral was the congregation's reaction to Savage's statement. They gave him a standing ovation. The response from the greater world at large has led to the popularity of the hashtag churchtoo. This hashtag, which started last November, has much of the same purpose as metoo, meaning that sexual assault happens in the hashtag churchtoo. Many well-known evangelicals, mostly women, have used the hashtag recently to display their disgust at not only the Memphis church story, but also about sexual abuse and assault in the church at large. Author Jen Hatmaker tweeted, "The church's instinct to harbor and shield abusers at the expense of their victims is baffling. If there was any place on earth where victims should be safe, defended, and vindicated, it should be in the house of Jesus. I suspect women will lead the way here. Hashtag rise up, hashtag churchtoo." Fellow writer Ann Voskamp said, "Church, when the prevailing word is boys will be boys, then we are saying girls will be garbage. And the church needs to not dismiss quote-unquote incidents, but call it what it actually is, a sexual assault on a minor. Hashtag metoo, hashtag silence is not spiritual, hashtag churchtoo." And of course, the question that we are here today to answer is, how do we as people of faith and people of the church see, react, and respond to a movement like this? Specifically when that movement becomes so closely tied to the church. And while I don't want to talk too much about the Tennessee church story specifically, I do want to use it as an example from which we can draw a few larger lessons. Firstly, in our world today, there are three types of people that generally have the most influence, and that is celebrities, government officials, and religious leaders. Even in a culture that is growing ever more secular, pastors, priests, and religious officials of all kinds still have incredible influence, which means a ridiculous amount of power. The difference, or at least it should be, between celebrities or government officials and church leaders is that church leadership is supposed to hold itself to a higher standard. In his letter to Titus, Paul writes about the qualifications for elders or leaders within the church. He says, "For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined." And in this circumstance, the idea of living above reproach means not only in our actions, but in how we deal with and communicate sexual abuse and assault within the church. When Jules Woodson was assaulted 20 years ago, she did the right thing, and we're learning the all too rare thing of telling someone. But according to her account, the church leaders at the time essentially encouraged her to keep quiet. Obviously, when someone abuses someone else, the abuser's actions are not at all above reproach. However, when you seek to hide the sins and crimes of fellow church leaders, you are no longer living above reproach either. Now, in this context, let's talk about forgiveness and grace. Obviously, these are two foundations of the Christian faith. And while I don't necessarily agree with it, I'm hoping that we can give the congregation the benefit of the doubt in this circumstance that their standing ovation was in a show of grace for the sin rather than condoning the action. But regardless, the scandalous grace of the gospel, as taught in Scripture, means that God would forgive someone like Andy Savage for that type of sin. He is not outside of God's grace, just like I am not outside of God's grace, just like you are not outside of God's grace. However, there is a difference between being forgiven for your sin and answering for your crime. The Bible does not teach that God's forgiveness somehow absolves us of earthly consequences. So when a church leader assaults someone, God may forgive him, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't still face legal action. And thirdly, and most importantly, and the thing that not enough people are talking about, the victims. So much has been coming out around the topic of sexual assault lately. So many stories. And the reaction from a lot of people, specifically from white men, has been to push back, to question, to minimize, and to even discredit. In the New Testament, James tells us to let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And James isn't just talking about the Bible here. He's talking about listening and being open to the truth. And for the first time, maybe ever, women have been given a platform to tell the truth and share their stories. And if I have learned one thing over the last couple months, it has been that this might be one time in history where white men should just choose to keep our mouths shut, and instead to show our support by giving that voice that has been solely ours for far too long to the people who have been silenced for even longer. Of course, I understand the hypocrisy of that statement, seeing that I am a white man who just spent the last 5 minutes talking. So I guess I'll take my own advice then. Keep being awesome. Hey friends, I know I said I was gonna shut up. I just wanted to say thank you for watching this video, and I wanted to remind you that we have one more new type of video, new experiment that we are doing in this month of January. Next week will be the final week of this little January experiment, and then it's all up to you. You're gonna get to vote on which of these last 4 Friday videos you wanna add into our canon. That is all I have for you today. I hope to see you next week for the final installment of this little January experiment. I love you all. Keep being awesome.